Hi folks, Jeff here. This episode with Kim Shuck is our last of 2021. I didn't want to let that moment go unnoticed. It's obviously been quite a year, the first full year of the pandemic. We want to recognize how incredibly privileged we are to have access to the vaccine, which has allowed us to meet so many of our guests in person this year. San Francisco is still doing very well for a major city, so there's that too. Michelle and I were blown away to be named Best Podcast and 48 Hills Best of the Bay. Thank you all for that, and thanks for your continued support over the years. We also want to thank all the guests, from the end of Season 3 to the beginning of Season 4 and up to this episode, for being part of our project to highlight the people who are still here and more vibrant than ever. We're going to take next week off, but check out Twitter and Instagram for some fun and engaging content. All right, on with the show.
And I'm like, I might be that poet. Which poet is that? You're the new poet laureate of San Francisco. And I was like, I guess I should have known, because of the high-end folk who have been that person before me, that it was sort of something that people not in San Francisco might know.
That was poet and artist Kim Shuck. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, Kim picks up where she left off in part 1, with her decision to stay in San Francisco and go to college at SF State. Other topics in this episode include her politics, her writing career, social pressures from being Cherokee, teaching, and being named San Francisco's 7th Poet Laureate. We end the episode with Kim's thoughts on what it means to still be here, as well as her outlook for her hometown. Be sure to listen through on this one, because Kim reads a couple of her poems at the end. Here's Kim.
Really, like in the 80s, who would have moved down to San Francisco?
Right.
What is the point of that?
Right.
So,
What year exactly did you start?
yeah, what year did I start? You know, I delayed starting, and I think I went to school in 85.
Okay. Were you, as a young woman now, like, politically conscious? This is like
Deeply.
thick of Reagan.
Deeply. So when I was actually at the protest at the was it the Democratic Convention in San Francisco?
In 84.
In 84,
yeah.
when Dolores Huerta got injured.
Mm-hmm.
Intriguingly, I ended up teaching her granddaughter at SF State. All things go through San Francisco State University. Yeah. It's a very important place. Yes. I know when I became the Poet Laureate, just as an aside, the Alumni Association called me up and said, we'd love to have you say some things about that, because aren't you the first? I'm like, no, I think I'm right in line with everybody else. I believe the only person who doesn't have an SF State connection was Ferlinghetti. Right. I could be wrong about that. There may be a connection. I'm not sure. But I do know almost everybody else has read there or taught there or, gone to school there. I know Devora was there. I know Alejandro had the office down the hall from me when I was teaching in ethnic studies. I know, So,
and when did writing or / poetry, when did that start for you? Was it before college?
We don't know.
We don't know.
No one knows. Neither the art nor the writing. Nobody knows when I started doing that. I've asked my parents. Neither of them remember.
Is it for you? Do you just feel like it's something you've always done?
I think I've always done it. I don't know, but I think I've always done it.
Yeah.
And then there's the I am super Indian story, which I could tell, which is that there are a lot of traditional lyric forms in Cherokee that definitely inspire me. That's not untrue. But the other part of that story is the Cicely Mary Barker Flower Fairy books were also a big lure for me.
Okay.
So that's the one that kind of breaks that a little bit. I know there are people who both want me and don't want me to be super Indian. So it's a little I'm afraid I grew up. Well,
Oh.
it's hard to know because I grew up during the Red Power movement where everybody was going, go to college, go to college, go to college. A bunch of us went to college, graduated, and it's like, you guys think you're too good for us now. It's like, we did what you asked us to
Right.
do. So just socially, there's a little bit of a
Double
weirdness
edge.
there. But just watching everybody bend over backwards trying to fulfill some kind of culturally interior stereotype was like difficult, and there are still people who do that thing, and it's really hard to watch because it's like when I'm making sarcastic comments at people who are like, we were hoping you would dress like a native person, I'm like, I own all of these clothes, these are my clothes, right? And you didn't show up in high-heeled buckle shoes and a powdered wig either. So, like, how is it that Europeans are the only ones who get to move on, and then you go to the next native event and it's like somebody's talking like a bad variation of the Jay Silverheels character from the film? It's just, it's maddening.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and it's like, well, it's also sad. It's like, why? Kimberly Blazer has this whole thing about performing indigeneity, and it's hard not to because you are expected to do that. And especially the whole hippie thing. God, I can't even tell you how many times in elementary school I was asked what my Indian name was. It's like, oh yeah, my Indian name's Kim.
Yeah.
It's Kim.
Yeah.
It's Kimberly if I've done something bad. It's
Kimberly and your middle name.
yeah, sometimes it's yeah. Yeah.
Can we go back? Because I barely skimmed the surface of like your political
My
life
political life.
in the 80s.
I was really political. I've remained pretty political. Yeah, I just it went from thing to thing. I was all about I think probably I got really into the political thing around Native issues.
Okay.
And then being so close to the Castro, and Reagan wouldn't even say AIDS, and there was just a lot of stuff going on around maybe it's better to keep the population from dying off, no matter what part of the population that might be. That really got to me. And so I was really political about that for a long time. When I got to SF State, I ended up being president of the student, Native student organization there, which was, I don't even think the real politics struck me until we ended up having an FBI agent start attending our meetings. I know that sounds paranoid, but he actually came out as an FBI agent to me.
Yeah.
And then I sort of came out to I outed him to everyone else and told them he was. And he was really upset. And I was like, maybe I had misunderstood what was going on here. Perhaps you didn't notice. I have flyers all over campus trying to lure people into these meetings. I don't care what you do for a living. If you think you're going to learn something, we will also teach you how to make fry bread, and you can try to learn something while you make fry bread. If you're going to be useful for me, I don't care what your job is.
Right.
And he was a nice guy, but it was like they had some weird idea. And I think after watching me organize dances and bake sales for a couple of years, they just sort of left. But I know that the organization had been on the COINTELPRO list for a long time because
the SF State.
Yeah, because they sort of thought that we were doing something evil, and it's like, maybe, but I never knew it. I'm a naive thing anyway, so it's possible. But
well, you weren't a Rockwell painting. I think anything that wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, we were certainly complaining about y'all, so maybe that's a problem. I don't know. Right. I mean, I think again, being complicit in the death of parts of the population that are targeted parts of the population is really
a problem.
Not what the advertising for the country is. So like, if you want me to change my opinion about it, get honest about what it is you're up to, and then maybe we'll talk about that. But right now, I think you say you have a responsibility to us, and you are definitely not meeting it. So that was definitely a perspective of mine that I've retained throughout all of these years, and I'm still active about all of that stuff. I march occasionally. I stand in groups of people occasionally. I mostly embarrass people with my words at this point, and I think that's probably a good thing. I wrote a whole book. I think it was it 50 days in a row, 30 days in a row? 55. I think it was 50. I don't think it was 55. I could be wrong. Anyway, I wrote a book called Murdered Missing, which was about murdered and missing Native women. And somebody in the audience is going to go, it's not just women. I know that. I wrote about murdered and missing Native women, so...
That reminds me, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter.
Yeah,
Shut up.
No, enough. That's not what I'm focusing on.
Right. Missing the point.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Can I just say, I'll put my hand up to that. When that first happened, I'm just such a naif. I missed the point on that one. I wasn't like part of some white militia arguing that all lives matter.
I would have guessed not.
No, everybody. And then it was like, no, this is, that, but I'm not sure that anybody really wants to be the number one most killed group of people for any reason.
There's not a race or a competition.
It would be great if it didn't feel sometimes like it's hyperbole is the only way to get attention. But to be honest, Native women really do vanish and get murdered more often than any other group of women in the country.
One episode of Dateline about it.
I know. Well, occasionally it'll be reported, but here's a cold cup of coffee. San Francisco is on the top 10 list for the cities in which that happens.
Okay.
Do you ever see it reported?
Never.
While I was writing it, I think it was 3-4 people I knew either got killed or vanished. People I knew.
While you're writing it.
We don't all know each other, by the way.
Right.
While I was writing it.
Right.
Okay.
Jeez.
So it's, I'm really political. I was part of the group that got the statue taken out of the Civic Center downtown. I've had a death threat. And I think that if I could work out where to put that on my resume, it'd be in there, because I think part of the job of being a writer is to piss off racists. So
well put.
Please be offended. It helps me know I'm pushing the right buttons.
I was going to say being offended proves the point of what you're trying to.
I think it does.
Can we go back to so did you graduate from SF State?
I did.
And what happened after that?
I went and had some children, and then I went back to SF State and took another degree there.
Like a second bachelor's or a master's?
Master of Fine Arts in Textiles.
Oh, sorry. What was your first degree in?
Art.
Okay.
With a minor in ethnic studies, Indian studies.
Okay. So you had kids, went back, got your master's, and then...
I had some kids and went back and got my master's, and then... what did I do? I mean, in between, I managed a yarn store, and I did a lot of things. I basically fed my imagination, and I think that's a thing that people don't always value highly enough. I think if you're going to be an artist, you sort of have to do that. So
when did you
I'm an inveterate walker of these hills. I love this city.
Yeah.
I walk all the time.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
When did you start reading out in front of people?
Oh, I think the first person who made me do that was Carol Lee Sanchez. Okay. And Carol Lee Sanchez, for those who don't know, was a Lakota, Lebanese, Scots-Irish poet from New Mexico who came here and ran the Coffee Gallery poetry readings in North Beach and knew all the characters, and took the California Poets in the Schools. It was then the Pegasus Project out of San Francisco State. Again, San Francisco State. Yes. She ran the Poetry Center out there for a while as well. And she took the Pegasus Project out of San Francisco State, made it statewide, and it's now California Poets in the Schools. And she was really influential on a number of poets in the area. Avacha, Gail Mitchell, Devorah Major. There are a lot of people who count her among the people who were inspirational to she also, now I always get the name of this thing wrong. I think it's called the Bay Area Poetry something or other,
okay.
That meets over in Berkeley. She did a lot of things and was really important to a lot of people. I dated her youngest son.
Okay.
And he was the first great love of my life. And I hung out with Carol Lee a lot. And at one point, we were doing something in the Mission Cultural Center, and she basically said, well, Kim's got a poem. Come up and read your poem. And I was like, gah!
Not talked about ahead of time.
This was not discussed.
I on the spot.
Did not agree to this. Where's my poem?
Yeah.
So anyway, I started reading then. Carol Lee was really a lot of those moments for me. There are people who claim to have had huge influence on my career, and maybe they have and maybe they haven't. But I'll tell you what, I never probably would have done it in any professional capacity at all if it weren't for her. She insisted that I participate in certain events, that one in particular, others also.
Was that the first time?
I think it was the first time I ever read in public. I'm pretty sure it was. Somebody may come forward and contradict that.
That's okay.
And that would be fine because I don't remember, and we don't know a lot about this. My parents totally don't remember either. I think my grandmother would have, but she's not around.
Do you remember it?
I remember it. I was terrified.
But afterwards, what did you think?
I was horrified.
Still,
I do not. I have been put on stages for a lot of my life. I modeled clothes way back in the day.
Okay.
For a friend who was a seamstress, and I've never been comfortable with it. I was a dancer. I hated that. I didn't hate dancing or modeling or any of it. If we could erase all of the people, that would be fine.
Like the audience.
Yeah, the audience could go away.
Okay.
But I don't have stage fright anymore.
Right.
I think if you do a thing multiple times a week for years on end, you will eventually get rid of it. Also, I found that teaching was performative in that way. And
Absolutely,
so I think, by which token I did 3 shows a day for 5 years.
Can we talk about
and
teaching?
that will really, yeah, sure.
Let's talk about that.
I think the first class I ever taught, I was in 3rd grade, and I taught my fellow students to crochet as a lunchtime activity.
Yes.
And then...
That's on the resume.
I think it is, yeah.
It should be.
Well, at this point, I can get whimsical about the resume because when what is also on the resume puts me on a list with Ferlinghetti and Jack Hirschman and Diane DePrima.
Right,
and, then at that point you can go, well, here's the real driver's license. And now you also have to deal with the fact that in 3rd grade, I won 2nd place in a public radio playwriting contest.
Oh.
So, I've been writing for a long time, and I also have some latitude to be creative with my resume because I've done a few things now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can be silly about it. And you write your bio a lot when you do what I do. Mm-hmm. If you're the Poet Laureate of San Francisco, a lot of people submit huge long bios, but if that's one of the things on your bio, you can afford to have it be 3 lines. And 2 of them can be really silly, and then you can say, and 7th Poet Laureate of San Francisco, and people will still take you kind of seriously.
Brings it back.
It's like, by the way, other people have agreed that I do this reasonably well. But I mean, I think my favorite bio that I have starts out, Kim Shuck is a silly protein. Which is technically true.
Sure.
Although we have one friend who says, you're not a silly protein. You are a series of silly proteins.
Oh, right. Oh.
Which is also true, although at what point is protein plural and at what point is protein?
Oh. Yeah,
I don't know.
If you say proteins, is it different kinds of protein or is it a collection
See, this is my question. I feel like I
kind?
am a complex protein, and that would be one.
Yeah.
But,
Did you say you taught at SF State, though?
I taught at SF State.
Past tense, that's not something you're still doing?
I don't do it now.
Okay.
I also taught at CCA.
Okay.
Which, although they're
after they dropped the crafts?
You know, I got hired there after they dropped the crafts,
Okay.
but I was despondent about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like they may be adding a T, apparently, for tech, which like I would have had they continued to hire me, which is what happened. They stopped hiring me.
Okay.
Had they continued to hire me, I would have quit. They say that I work there on their website, but I don't, and probably never will again unless they offer me an enormous pile of money.
Okay.
For many, many reasons we will not get into because you will be sued. So, and I am taking pity. And
what did you teach at these fine institutions?
I taught Native arts, Native American arts.
Mm-hmm.
I taught, what else did I teach? I taught a couple of classes, mostly surrounding I was for CCA, I was in the diversity department, which has become something else, and I don't know. I will never work for it. I don't care. I taught in American Indian Studies, so I taught the arts class, the science class, and at one point an oral literature class as well. Mm-hmm. But before that, I've volunteered to teach things, science through origami mostly, at elementary schools all over San Francisco. Mm-hmm. For a period of time, I taught poetry and occasionally got paid for it through California Poets in the Schools. I wrote curriculum for the Exploratorium as part of their diversity group. I forget what we were called. Mm-hmm. And we just got a copy of the book that some of my work is in, but they spelled my name wrong, which is why I never knew that was that way before. Just recently. It's okay. A lot of people spell my name wrong. When I won the award for, I won a National Laureate Fellowship through the Academy of American Poets, and they spelled my name wrong.
Is it Shuck? Is that what they do?
Yeah, Shuck. They put a C into Shuck.
Oh,
and
S-C-H?
Yeah. My last name is actually a noun. It's a noun in the language we're speaking right now. It baffles me that people always misspell it.
Right.
It's like, think the green stuff on the outside of corn.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I have a history of teaching. It's something I do sort of... it's an addiction I think I've finally broken, you know. Hi, my name is Kim Shuck. I teach. It's
now past tense.
It's
taught.
Well, maybe.
Probably. Possibly.
It's been a couple of months since my last teaching assignment. I do workshops now occasionally for friends if they ask me really pretty.
I think I'm ready for the story of Poet Laureate, which you reminded me.
You gotta ask, yeah.
Was it being informed that you were, and then the message going out to the public?
So the story starts here. I am at a poetry reading for the release of a book in Berkeley. So I'm in this anthology. I go to the event. We get there a little late. I skid in just in time to read. I do my reading. Afterwards, I'm standing around with Kimi Sugioka, who is currently the Poet Laureate of Alameda. The two of us are standing there next to each other, and a friend of mine walks up and says, "I've been told you're going to be the next Poet Laureate of San Francisco." And I laughed. Sure I am. I think I laughed to the extent that I had to exercise a lot of mouth control in order not to laugh juice out my nose.
Oh, okay.
It was really funny to me that was even the thing.
Right.
So Kimi Sugioka and I had a good laugh about that. And then people commented that I'm Kim and she's Kimi and our last names both start with S, and that was very funny and ha ha ha. So that was the end of that. And then later in the same thing, I'm like poking around in the Aram sandwiches on the food table, and somebody else came up to me and said, "I heard you're going to be the next Poet Laureate of San Francisco." And again, I laughed, but it's like slightly uneasy. A couple weeks later, I'm asked to read at a memorial reading for John Trudell, who had passed away, and somebody comes up to me and says, if we nominate you for Poet Laureate of San Francisco, will you accept the nomination? And I said, sure. No, but you'll do the gig? Absolutely. If they appoint me that, I will absolutely do the gig. And I'm thinking of the list of humans who have done this before me. And it's not a minor group of people. They're incredible poets. And
You've mentioned them before. Do you want to mention them again?
Yeah, okay. In order, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Janice Miracatani, Devorah Major, Jack Hirschman, Diane DePrima, Alejandro Murguia, and I was the seventh. Mm-hmm. And it's not an inconsiderable group of people. Mm-hmm. Some of them are more famous for their poetry. Some are more famous for their activism. They are all both poets and activists. Mm-hmm. And, some of them have been very important and formative to my life. Mm-hmm.
And now you're
So
among
I
them.
didn't think there was any possibility that I was going to end up on that list.
Right.
I mean, to the point that, there is a book out there that somebody I used to work with wrote in which it says... it refers to me as just being a community poet. It's all I ever wanted to be. It was a local community poet. That was my whole goal, was to keep writing and to make sure that there were readings so that I could read at them. And that was it. That was the end all be all of it. And occasionally get published in an anthology, right? And, but then I think I'd won an award that got me my first book. So yeah, I had a book. So yay me. And, was periodically tapped to publish in these things. So they nominated me, and then there were 3 people in the city who wandered around with nomination forms. So I got multiply nominated. I never nominated myself. I thought it was hilarious that anybody even thought about it. I came up with a really great project that I wanted to do, and so in the fullness of time, it was a very long process. In the fullness of time, it was I was asked to submit a curriculum vitae, which I don't think people know what that means, because they say it and what they really mean is they want a resume. Yeah. Nobody wants my 50-page doorstopper, because I have been a working artist and a working poet my whole working life, right? So the resume is worked here as a teacher, worked there, was a barista early on and did these things, right? But that's manageable chunk of stuff, right? You want every publication and every performance? That is pages and pages. Mm-hmm. Even if we print it on both sides of the paper, it's pages and pages and pages, right? So I just thought it was funny. I walked it down there because I walked it down to the library because I didn't want to pay for the shipping on the chunk of stuff. And the eyes went wide when I dumped it on somebody's desk, too. I have done a fair few things. So I still thought it was funny, and I was flabbergasted that they asked for, further stuff. I was baffled by the whole thing. And then I got a phone call from City Hall. And I was like, there's really only one thing that could be. He's obviously calling to tell me he's sorry he didn't pick me. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
So I get a phone call from Airly, and he tells me, and they're not going to announce it until their chosen announcement time. And Doug and I have a talk, my partner and I have a talk about it. And we decide we're going to drive to go do a thing in Oklahoma, because I am not going to be able to take the time off for a while. So we decided to take the trip then.
Get it out of the way.
So we drive back to Oklahoma, many adventures, excellent story. There are poems associated with it. I will let people find those on their own. Mm-hmm. On the way back, we stay with my friend in Norman, Oklahoma. Then we get in the car and we head back west. So we're in Texas. We spend the night in Texas. We wake up.
In Amarillo by any means?
Where were we?
Not.
I don't think so.
Doesn't matter.
It was in the Panhandle.
I'm from Texas. And so
anyway, we were in the Texas Panhandle somewhere at a motel. Mm-hmm. So we get up and we have our bad motel food and we have our bad motel coffee, and we get in the car and we get to a point where suddenly my phone is getting service again, and it goes off like a popcorn machine. And I'm looking at the text and all this stuff, and it's like, oh, apparently they've announced it. and people know. So then we'd go in and out of things. You know how that area is. It's like you're down in a dip and then there's no service. You come up a little bit, there's service. We get into New Mexico. We drop our friend off at the Santa Fe airport. And
tiniest airport
which
in the world.
Is minuscule and weird, and the traffic
Yes.
pattern around that airport is
So weird.
crazy.
Yes.
So we find our way, and now we're driving up to Taos, and even weirder cell coverage. So going down, nothing, coming back up. My phone lights up. And it's crazy. It felt really weird, and it started kind of panicking me a little bit
Because you weren't there?
No, because there were so many people trying to get a hold of me. It was just the volume of energy being directed at me at that moment. I was like, sort of like, I am actually horrified now that I am the poet laureate of San Francisco. This is very bad.
It was funny, and now it's scary.
And now I'm terrified. So we're doing this thing. So we pull up in Taos to the place where our friend had booked us a room, this really snazzy place in Taos. And Taos is kind of snazzy, and this place is kind of uber snazzy.
Correct. Yes, I was just there, and I will attest.
It is very much
uber
uber snazzy.
Yes.
So we're pulling into it took a minute or two to figure out how to pull into the parking lot, even, because it is sort of like, this is exclusive space. It definitely has
There's a wall.
There's a wall.
And a small...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely, they make you aware that this space is exclusive. And now I'm really panicking, because I've been panicking about the one thing. We've been eating in the car. I've got like taco sauce and crumbs. I've got taco sauce down one breast. So I'm like rummaging before I go in to register at the
snazzy hotel.
The snazzy hotel. Or I think it's actually a retreat, a resort.
Probably, yeah.
It's got some other word associated with it. Anyway, I'm like finding a scarf so that I can cover up the taco stain on my breast so that I'm not like, I'm not, looking too raggedy, but I'm probably smelled. We've been in the car for a long time. I know I smelled of taco sauce because I had it all over me. And I'm freaking out just a little. And as we're pulling in, there's a rabbit in the parking space to do the check-in. And Rabbit is the trickster for Cherokee mythology. Oh, okay. And I went, And I should have taken more of a hint from that. So I walk in, I've got my ID, I've got all the things. I'm like, they're going to look at me and I'm going to have problems registering for this. So this is going to be bad. So I walk in and the space, the atrium is like very colonial, like New Mexico. So it's all these beautiful tiles and all this wrought iron, and it's very echoey in the space. Mm-hmm. And I'm signing in, but it's going really well. I'm signing in and everything's fine. I had everything they wanted. I had the ID. I had the thing. The reservation had been made. It was there. They knew it was there. It was all going quite well. And the other person checking people in looks over at me and in like this huge voice goes, "You're that poet." And I'm like, what? Oh my God. So I like checked to make sure that the scarf was still over the taco stain. And I'm like, I might be that poet. Which poet is that? You're the new poet laureate of San Francisco. And I was like, I guess I should have known because of the high-end folk who have been that person before me, that it was sort of something that people not in San Francisco might know. But it completely freaked me out.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah. And I have nothing else. I'm like, I'm a word person. My brain is completely empty. So I took a step backwards and like right behind me, I hear a voice that sounds vaguely familiar. Mm-hmm. And the voice says, how long has this been happening to you? And I turned around and I think I recognized this person as one of my great comedy heroes of all time. And I was like, and he goes, I find that it's easier if you have a character to play so that when people recognize you, you don't have to be yourself and get intimidated. And I went, oh, that's good.
Really good idea, yeah.
I'm going to have to do that. Yeah. And then he says, do you know where the candy vending machines are? And I said, no, I just got here but they're generally with the laundry machines. And he goes, ah. And there's literally an arrow pointing laundry.
And vending.
Vending.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it said vending, but it definitely said laundry. So he went off, it's like, please enjoy your candy bar. Oh my God. So we check in and we get changed. The bed is the size of our bedroom. Mm-hmm. There are 2 bathrooms in this room. And like, there's a display for the toilet paper, which sort of went way beyond what I was prepared for. And everything smells of sage. And I thought, yes, this is a resort. Mm-hmm. And then we drove off to go meet with the person we were having dinner with, who I thought I'd met before, but who turned out to be, as she described herself, a groupie, which is a recurring theme in my life. But it's very strict because I don't think anybody knows who I am. So when people go, oh, hey, I think we know each other. So that's my big Taos story. It was a very strange couple of weeks getting used to having people come up and talk to me like they knew me.
Surreal.
I'm not used to it yet.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful story. There's one more thing I want to do. Our theme on the show this season is We're Still Here.
Yeah.
I could bore you to death with what that means for us. My point is I want to know what
I have
it means
2 things it means for me.
For you.
Yeah. Even other newcomer Native people are surprised when they find out how many Indigenous people live in San Francisco. And most of us aren't Ramaytush, who are the Indigenous from here. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of Native people who live in this city and in the Bay Area generally. There are just a ton of us, an acre. And that's part of, anytime I hear We're Still Here, I think that. But also, I'm told, even by people who grew up here, oh, we're unicorns. We're not unicorns. I know a ton of people who were born and raised in this city. I know a ton of people who were born and raised in this city. I am tired of this perception that we're all gone. Mm-hmm. It's just that there are also a lot of people who are not from here. Mm-hmm. We're not unicorns. And actually, there are a lot of there. I feel like I run into people I went to elementary school with a lot. There are a lot of us here. Mm-hmm. And God knows I made a few people here who are still here too. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, I made more of us than I am.
Right.
So
you multiplied.
I multiplied.
Yeah.
So I feel like we need to let that go, because that sort of suggests that all of the traditions and the knowledge, the back knowledge from here is gone. It's not. There's a lot of it still here. Mm-hmm. And the time that I really think about that is there was a thing, an online thing that was written by this woman who's from here as well, but much younger than me. And there was some comment made about how there are no ghost stories from San Francisco. I was like, Where is wrong with you? Of course there are. Would you like to hear some? It's complicated for me, but I get very exasperated by that, because I feel like instead of saying things like that, maybe questions could be asked instead of making statements that end up really being, if not entirely untrue, then definitely a bizarre perspective on things.
Yeah.
There are a lot of us around.
And then what would you say your outlook for the near future in San Francisco? Are you optimistic? You've talked a little bit about cycles and that kind of thing.
I am optimistic. I feel like, so also just walking around, I hear every year for that 4-day period when we get ridiculously hot weather, it is never like this in San Francisco. Yes, it is. Every year it is this time of year. I can set my clock by this, every year. There are plants that count on that 4 days that have evolved here. This is a thing that happens. Or then it's like, oh my gosh, it's so dry. And then every 7 years or so, there's massive rains and people go, it's never like this in San Francisco. Yes, it is. Just about every 7 years or so, you get crazy weather like this. And it's not usual. We live in a semi-arid place. I know that the taps lead people to believe that there's just water forever. It's not true. This is not that place. that's why sericulture gardens require far less work here than any other thing. If you go for dry, that's where we are. And I feel very hopeful, though. I feel like there are a lot of people who come here and then like make the changes they make, which some of them have, and we like them or we don't like them. There are a lot of them that I haven't liked recently. And then something happens that they don't like that's out of what they consider to be the norm for here, but is actually part of bigger cycles that they hadn't seen all of yet. And then they leave. They go away. And I'm happy to see the back of some of them. But I feel like the people who invest in the city, who commit to being part of the community here, who aren't just sort of treating this place like the new idea of assembly line where there's a gear and every gear is the same. There's a city, any city's the same because I can just plug in my computer and do the thing. No, places are different. Places have a culture. I'm very hopeful. Things I would like to see. We need a medium-sized earthquake. We need a medium-sized earthquake to panic the people who will be panicked by that, who will leave, and then the city will shrink a little bit, and it kind of needs to. It's a small place. We also could use a moment where our art museums stop viewing themselves as a gallery instead of a museum, and everything's just some traveling show from somewhere else. I've done a lot of work around the De Young. I've done a lot of work around the Palace of Legion of Honor. I've done a lot of things with the Academy of Sciences, and that goes back to right after high school when I volunteered there. I've spent a lot of time in our museums, and I've written about the De Young, and I feel like I would love to see the De Young really do some shows of the stuff in their collections. The collections are incredible. I'm happy to see the occasional spectacular alternative thing that's been boxed up and sent from somewhere else. But the whole point of culture is that it is regional. I mean, art regionally, eat regionally, politics regionally, so that we can like make things accommodate a perspective that's different from every other main street everywhere. I think we need to really...
It's like show us to us.
Show us to us. There are artists from out here and poets from out here that never get the kind of attention that they would get if they lived in New York. We need to stop looking east to find culture. We need to stop looking to the East Coast to find culture. There is culture here. There is excellence here. There is stuff here that is of here. Watershed. Village sites still sing, resonate through hidden shell mounds from every watershed that wrap the hills on thick-aired nights like these. Songs throb through the sidewalks, through the bark of bay trees, in the ache and full bloom of every angled slab of rock peering through the hillsides around Rocky Point and Glen Park Canyon. Remember their true names, call them out like birds do, announcing boundaries, unseen but heard if listened for. There is still joy in these hillsides. The water still runs here. Coming down into Eureka Valley. This hillside remembers being wild, and the trees still talk about the orchard that replaced purple bunch and rattlesnake grass, the arroyo. Salamanders coil under ceramic pots, sing songs about wet years under the bay laurel, and the yerba buena explain the fog and how the hillsides came to be. White roses grew from rootstock after the grafts failed and the bearded iris bolted. Every 10 years or so, saffron crocus bloom under mirabelle plums. Cusp. The morning star, the redwood caught her for the moment. This ancestor net, this old game on the cusp of a day that I know will be hot, will bake the tiny tomatoes on the vine and set the lavender and rosemary scent free. Ripples of early autumn that break out in orange butterflies.
That was Kim Shuck. We're taking next week off, but the next story in San Francisco is going to be a huge treat for us to bring to your ears. Episode 33 drops on Tuesday, January 4th, 2022, wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 160 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review our show so we can reach even more folks. We love email. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, keep dreaming, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.